Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's an absolutely beautiful November day, and we've been getting plenty of rain mixed with some unusually high temps, which it seems like the mushrooms out here in the local forests of the Pacific Northwest are really appreciating. Let's jump into this forest. Let's see what we see. And right away, take a look at this just off to the side of the trail. This is the start of the candy cap mushroom, Lactarius rubidus. This is one of my candy cap patches. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to see this out this early, but here it is. Let's dive in and take a look. And initially, I only saw one or two of these little candy caps growing virtually on the trail. But as I'm looking more closely, I'm kind of shocked because I'm seeing literally hundreds of these little tiny starts to what is undoubtedly one of my favorite mushrooms. Now these are just getting started right now, so I'm not out here to forage or harvest them today, but this stands out as one of the most unique culinary mushrooms that you'll find out here. It's got a really sweet, kind of mapley taste, and in fact it's so sweet that it's oftentimes used in baking recipes for holiday cookies, caramels, even to flavor ice cream. Let's take a closer look. So this time of year there are a lot of similar looking milk caps out here in the forest that are all in the Lactarius genus, and at this young stage, to be honest, they're somewhat difficult to differentiate. Now I know these are candy caps because of the simple fact that I'm out here foraging these from this exact same spot every single year. So that's something that is good to know about these. Once you latch on to a candy cap spot, that's going to be a consistent spot for years to come. And they're going to produce somewhat reliably. Now notice here that what we're seeing are a lot of beaked hazelnut leaves. All of my best spots here in the Pacific Northwest occur in the same spots as our local hazelnut trees. So I haven't read of any known mycorrhizal associations with hazelnut, but I suspect that that's one thing that's going on here. Now another thing to note is that all of our candy caps are going to have certain features that are going to get more pronounced with a little bit of age. These are still really young, but they're going to have a cap that has a little bit of a texture to it, almost like an orange peel. And if I were to break this off or kind of cut the gill surface, it's going to exude a thin latex that's sort of oftentimes compared to skim milk. So it's not going to be opaque or thick, but a thin, watery milk. And a good part of tracking these down is really just eliminating the imposters, of which there are many. So if you see a similar looking mushroom that has maybe a sticky or a smooth cap, you can eliminate that right away and you can rule it out. Similarly, again, if you've got that thick milk or latex, that's going to be another factor that's going to eliminate that from being the actual mushroom that we're after. But what I always tell people, and what I think holds true, when in doubt, dry it out. That maple smell is a dead giveaway. And as I mentioned before, be checking under these beaked hazelnuts. So these will have this shrubby growth. They'll be dropping their leaves right about now. I'm thoroughly convinced that there's a connection there. Let me know if you've observed similar things. So it's interesting because sometimes experienced foragers, they'll know that the dead giveaway is actually that scent. And because you can't oftentimes detect that when it's fresh, only when it's dried out, people will sometimes carry around a lighter with them, and they'll actually singe the edge of the cap just to kind of pick up on that positive ID while they're in the field. So be checking under these hazelnuts. This isn't really a beginner mushroom. There's a lot of common lookalikes. You want to be able to positively differentiate this from the deadly Gallerina, which I don't think looks all that similar, but again, use this as a starting point to really dig deeply on positive identification for this one. It's really a great mushroom, and especially with the holidays around the corner, it's such a unique one to add to all your baked goods. Some people even add it to curries that call for a sweet flavor. So really cool mushroom. And just off the trail up here, we've got another one of our favorite edible mushrooms. This, of course, our old friend, the Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus. It's been a heck of a year for these ones. Kind of a weird start, stop, finish, but they're really out in full force right now. And often when I'm out searching for chanterelles, I like to walk these angled kind of slopes or hillsides. And here's why. See how you get kind of a side view or profile? You can see how this wasn't popping out from that needle or duff layer by a lot. But we caught that little angle, and again, walking up slope can sometimes be a helpful component of being able to spot these guys. We can see this has probably been out a while, but still worth bringing with us. And one more thing that I'm often seeking out when I'm looking for chanterelles, you can see that I've pulled up in kind of what I would describe as a bowl. I'm thinking about moisture when I'm looking for Pacific golden chanterelles. You can see one hiding just down here under the slough, and I suspect that it's not alone, because these spots that tend to accumulate or pool moisture are spots where the chanterelles like to really get well established. We can see we've got a bigger one down here. Now it looks like this one has likely been pinned underneath these sticks and twigs and forest debris. That's something that happens. We can see that it was somewhat stifled, unable to kind of grow perhaps the way that it would have preferred. Let's give it a tug though and take a look. Looks too like it's a little bit banged up or maybe nibbled on one of those edges, but pretty good size, decent amount of heft to this one. And if we glance around, yeah, I see a little color back there. Are you seeing that? I suspect that there's more than one more in this little bowl. And remember, as we've discussed before, if you find a single Pacific golden chanterelle, that's your cue to really slow down. I would suggest getting low to the ground, taking your time, moving slow, because there's a really good chance that you're going to find several in that vicinity or nearby. Beautiful, beautiful Pacific golden chanterelle. I'm sure there's more of these out here. And take a look at this. So I just took a quick sec here to admire this little flush or fruiting. Isn't that pretty? Look at the color of this. So this is growing from dead wood. I suspect that this may well be in the Gymnopolis genus, one of our rust gills, but I'm not 100% sure. And a lot of times it's difficult to get these guys down to species. Let me know if you're watching this and you feel like you know exactly what we're looking at here, but I just figured I'd take a quick sec to admire these. Really beautiful, beautiful mushroom. And as is the case oftentimes when we slow down to take a quick sec and to admire all this beauty that exists out here, sometimes we bump into exactly the very things that we're seeking out or looking for just by slowing down. And you know, when I was looking at those, I glanced over to my side. Check this out, what I saw on the other side of this log. Look at this. Just a massive, massive Pacific golden chanterelle hanging out in the mosses. Let's take a look at that. That guy's got a nice amount of heft to it. A welcomed addition to today's haul. And here's one I always love to see. This is the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis. And if we look underneath, notice that it's got this pored layer. This is the distinction of being one of our only ectomycorrhizal polypores. Beautiful. And just down here, we've got another common mushroom this time of year. This is what's typically referred to as the mat jack, or sometimes the western painted jack. This is Suillus lakei, And notice how, the cap is full of these scaly little fibrils or hairs. This is really distinctive, especially when it's young. Sometimes those will wash off. We also see a partial veil that's still intact, that's a whitish color. Now this one, as referenced before, has an association with some of our Gomphidius mushrooms. This one specifically is going to pair with Gomphidius subrosaeus and Gomphidius smithii. But look at that, isn't that beautiful? So this is actually an edible mushroom. It generally grows in association with Douglas fir, and it's very common out here. Sometimes this can be confused with Suillus caerulescens, which we've talked about before. As this grows and matures and kind of gets a little bigger, sometimes those hairy little fibrils or scales can actually wash off of this one. Now I just want to take a quick second to point out another one over here that's the same mushroom, but you can see a little bit of a cross section here. So this one has a little more age on it. We can see that difference in the appearance on the cap. Also notice that it's got that pinkish staining flesh where it's been cut, a yellow sponge layer underneath that you can see here, and it's got those elongated pores that are so typical of our Suillus genus mushrooms. So a great one to be able to recognize even if you're not seeking it out to consume. And just up here on the side of the trail, let's take a look at this guy. We've got a couple mushrooms that are really good size. We can see that they're bright white in color, a little bit of kind of a grayish, fibrous nature up on the cap, little bit wavy at the margin. Again, these are good size. Let's give it a tug and take a look underneath. Yeah, look at this. So you can see the base down there. It comes up with a little bit of mycelial mass. This one has a little bit of a groove in the stipe, so it's a little bit flattened out. We've also got decurrent gills, again a wavy margin, and a good size. I believe that what we're looking at is the cloudy Clitocybe, Clitocybe nebularis. And yeah, I'm just giving this a sniff. This has a really, really distinctive, sort of skunky or musky smell to it. And again, a really large cap. Look at that. Isn't that something? So this one it's interesting because it's one that I'll see fairly often. You could confuse it with other mushrooms in the Clitocybe genus, or even, we featured that one that fluoresces blue underneath, the Leucopaxillus albismus. If you missed that episode from last fall, definitely check it out. This is one that could be confused with that, but I believe that we're looking at the cloudy Clitocybe. And just look at how beautiful the underside of this is with these decurrent gills. Now it's worth noting that, superficially, one could argue, especially if just looking at the top of this, from the top of the cap down, it looks a little bit like some of the tricholomas that we have here. But one of the key differentiating feature is the decurrent gills. So Clitocybe will have those decurrent gills, whereas the tricholoma will not. And all along this trail, we've got another example of one of our slippery jacks. This is what's commonly referred to as the fat jack, Suillus caerulescens. This tends to be a little bit drier and somewhat preferable. The other Suillus that we mentioned earlier, the mat jack, that's also edible, but this tends to be preferred. Now you can see this one's a little bit aged. You'd want to get this in a younger state. But I'm told that oftentimes these Suillus mushrooms will get worked into commercial porcini powders, sort of as a filler, and some people really like them. But this is one that I definitely wanted to pause to talk about a little bit. So we just previously looked at the cloudy Clitocybe, and this is one that I referenced as being a potential lookalike. So this is very likely a tricholoma, quite possibly the gray knight or the mouse trike. It goes by different names. But it could also be another tricholoma. You can see I pulled one that was right there at the base that we'll look at here. But another one that this could be is the leopard trike. There are, like I said, quite a few tricholomas that look similar. Here's the one that I pulled, so take a look. Notice underneath, this has a distinctly notched gill, so we can see as we get close into the stipe, there's a little bit of a notch as opposed to the decurrent gills that we saw recently with that cloudy Clitocybe. Now I also want to mention too that this has a somewhat farinaceous odor, so it's got sort of a unique aroma or scent to it. And you know, we've talked about in videos past, we've talked about the yellow knight, which is a great edible mushroom. Some of these gray tricholomas are also edible, but as a group, I tend to steer clear and give a wide berth to these ones because of the simple fact that there are so many that look similar to one another. And you know, even if this is the gray knight or, you know, the mouse trike, there are a lot of different mushrooms that get generally lumped into that same name without specificity to the species. So it's sort of a species group that's not super well defined, which is why I tend to just admire these in the field. But what a beautiful mushroom, right? Look at that. Tricholoma. And this is kind of interesting as I've been admiring the gills and watching the insects do their thing on the underside here. We've got this fly showing up. I've just been curious if this fly is here for the insects or here from the mushroom, or maybe both, maybe neither. Hard to know. But it's always interesting to see the roles that these different insects play in the dissemination of spores of mushrooms over the many, many years. A lot of these mushrooms and different fungal partners have kind of teamed up with various insects in interesting ways. So I always think that it's an interesting topic. I oftentimes have more questions than answers as it pertains to these unique relationships, but cool to see this insect taking an interest in this tricholoma as well. Again, you can kind of see those notched gills here in the background that again are very different than what we were observing with the Clitocybe earlier, but both beautiful mushrooms in their own right. And this fly here agrees. Fun to see. And boy, as we're on the topic of white-gilled mushrooms that are prolific out here this time of year, I couldn't walk right by these guys without pausing to at least take note. I've been seeing a ton of these short-stemmed Russulas, Russula brevipes, popping up, oftentimes forming these mushroom bumps that we refer to generally as shrumps, popping up just everywhere out here in these Doug fir hemlock forests this time of year. We can see another little one down here, but look at this one just back here. This is just massive. I don't know if the camera will effectively convey the scale or scope of this specific mushroom, but this is an absolute beast. Now, most of us may be most familiar with the short-stemmed Russula brevipes, just by nature of its association with the lobster mushroom. So that's actually the same mushroom that's been parasitized by another mushroom or fungus, Hypomyces lactiflorum, that turns it a bright orange color and yields it into or creates a fantastic edible mushroom that we oftentimes seek out and that you may see in local markets and stores and even restaurants. That's one that I always love to forage, but again, it's actually the same mushroom that's been parasitized by Hypomyces lactiflorum. So, kind of interesting to note, if you foraged or harvested the lobster, you can certainly see the similarity in the shape and morphology. Cool to see. And just up the trail here, we've got one of my absolute favorite finds out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest this time of year. Look at this colorful little guy. So this is what's commonly referred to as the Western Witch's Hat. This is in the Hygrocybe singeri group. And we can see that we've got several of these fruiting out here through the moss under some salal. This is primarily Doug fir hemlock forest. And you know, this is a species complex. So this used to be referred to very generally or vaguely as the witch's hat, which was based on European taxonomy and took on the name Hygrocybe conica. But we've since realized that we've got our whole kind of unique species complex out here. Now, what I want to point out on this one, so notice we've got white gills underneath. You also may have noticed on that orangish, reddish cap, a little bit of dark staining. So this will actually stain black just from handling or disturbance. So you can see those little kind of dark speckles or spots up there on the cap. Well, you know, where I pulled this one, which by the way, it has this kind of slick, greasy feel, you can see it already starting to blacken up. That's really distinctive. Now, mushrooms that are in the Hygrocybe genus are going to tend towards these really bright, kind of warm colors. So you see a lot of reds and oranges and yellows. And of course, this Western witch's hat is no exception to that. And boy, just look at the way that the sunlight is hitting that. This is really a unique and welcome sight out here in the Pacific Northwest forest, especially this time of year. They can really brighten things up substantially. So Hygrocybe mushrooms are one of several genus that are in the Hygropheraceae group or kind of family that we're looking at. And these are collectively known as the waxy caps. Now they get that name not necessarily because the caps themselves have a waxy feel, but more the gills. So they have these extra long basidia that the spores are born off of that'll have sort of like a soft, waxy, warm wax feel to them. And this particular mushroom is going to have sort of a greasy feel to it in its entirety. So you might have noticed when I tried to pull this stipe, it was really slick and slippery to the touch. And this is one of those mushrooms that any time that I do happen across this one, I tend to spend a lot of time with it. There's just something about it that's so visually stunning. And I oftentimes see it around Halloween or early November. It tends to always kind of poke its head out this time of year in abundance. And so it's not exactly a rare sight, but it's something that I always marvel at and always love to spend time with. And on this particular one, you can see some of that blackening down there on the stipe, a little bit on the cap. Boy, the way that that sun is hitting this is really a treat. I feel like a lot of times a year when I see this, we're in the dark, kind of rainy period where it's rare to see sun on these guys. But notice how the gills underneath, getting those into the focus, see how they're kind of a gray color? So these will start out bright white, and then in age, they'll turn kind of a duller, kind of drabber gray that you're seeing on that one. But boy, just incredible to see the sun hitting these and lighting these up. What a treat. You know, and we're seeing a fair number of them out here today. Isn't that something? And I tell you, there are a lot of different waxy caps that are out here. Tons of species just here in the Pacific Northwest. But these Western witches' hats, one of the dead giveaways for this specific species group or complex is to look for this blackening. And here's this one that I pulled. Look at how dark this has become just in the last minute or two since I disturbed it. That's a dead giveaway for this group. So we've got beautiful white waxy gills, we've got blackening stipe and cap, both signature features of Hygrocybe singeri. And you know, it's funny because anytime that I slow down in the forest and I stop to admire one individual species as we're doing here with this Western witch's cap, I tend to see other things. Look at this. We've got a little example of a bird's nest fungi likely in the Nidula genus. There are a couple different genus and different species that tend to pop up out here. This is one that we've talked about in the past, but you can even see some little peridioles, or the spore-bearing eggs, born from these nest fungus, interspersed with the western witch's hat. And just off the trail here, I had to stop to check this one out. So take a look at this. So we've got one of our milk caps, likely in the Lactarius genus. And notice how this cap has a little bit of a texture to it. I had to stop to look at this one because, you know, earlier today we talked about the candy cap mushroom. Now this one in particular, I have a sneaking suspicion that this is not a candy cap, but it's certainly one that I would stop to investigate. And we discussed earlier what that process looks like. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, examining the latex or the milk that this exudes when it's either broken or the gills are disturbed. So let's take a look at this one. Let's see if we can get this to lactate at all, and we'll analyze this and see. It looks like it's not exuding too much milk just yet, which I'm kind of somewhat surprised by. Oh, there it starts to go a little bit. Let's get a sense of what that's looking like. And yeah, so there we go. So notice how this has kind of a thick, somewhat opaque milk. And so this is not characteristic of the candy cap, and there are so many fakers out here. Now what I'll do, I'm gonna actually take this back with me. You know, as I said earlier, when in doubt, dry it out. I feel like I've got a pretty good beat on where the candy cap patches are in the forest that I'm exploring today. And I don't think this is one of them. So I'll add to the bottom of this screen what the result is once I dry it out. But I have a sneaking suspicion that this is one of our other common milk caps in the genus that's not the one that we're looking for. And just down here, we've got an example of yet another very common mushroom out here this time of year. This is what's commonly referred to as the western black elfin saddle, Helvella vespertina. And you can kind of see when you look at these, this one's a little bit deformed, but you know, the stipe of this is going to be fluted and have this really kind of interesting hollow structure. And then the cap will oftentimes have the shape of a black saddle that you can imagine an elf riding on. This one is white, so these ones have a tendency to be impacted or affected by what's commonly referred to as a Helvella mold. That's in the Hypomyces genus. Now this is kind of an interesting one because it's known as being edible, but it's somewhat with caution. So it should be well cooked, and you should generally avoid these ones, like the ones that we're seeing here, that are affected by this mold. And just up here, we've got one that hasn't yet been affected by that Hypomyces helvella mold. This is a more typical looking black elfin saddle. Classic form. Let me know if you've tried that one. Right next to it, we've got another one of these matte jacks. So this again, one of our slippery jacks in the Suillus genus. At this youngest state, it can look somewhat similar to a honey mushroom, but this is our matte jack, or also commonly referred to as the western painted jack. And just up here, this is somewhat of an odd sight. Take a look at this. This kind of has this weird little floral kind of pinwheel looking shape to it. I think this is a mushroom that's been chewed on or nibbled on and has continued to grow. So not the best example of this particular mushroom, but interesting to see nonetheless. And if we look down this log, so notice this is a Douglas fir log. This is more typical of this one. What we're looking at here is commonly referred to as the conifer tuft, Hypholoma capnoides. And this is a really interesting mushroom to know. It's quite common out here, growing off a conifer wood, as the common name suggests. And it's going to have a similar appearance to a mushroom that we've discussed in videos past that is quite toxic, Hypholoma fasciculare, or the sulfur tuft. And an easy way to differentiate this, I'm reaching to grab my UV flashlight. I've got a 365 nanometer UV flashlight with me. And if I hit this particular mushroom with this light, you'll notice you may or may not be able to even tell that the light is on it. If this were a conifer tuft, Hypholoma fasciculare, which is a toxic mushroom that grows in similar habitats, we would see a really just incredibly vibrant, neon, glowing green color. We featured that on this channel in videos past, so those of you who have seen that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This one doesn't necessarily do that. In fact, I'm catching a little bit of a light blue, a little bit of a green, but nothing too pronounced. But you can see, similar to the sulfur tuft, which is a really common sight out here, these are also growing from dead wood in these really dense concentrations or clusters, popping out from these logs. So they're easily confused. Now, believe it or not, this particular mushroom is actually an edible mushroom, but a lot of times it goes overlooked just for the simple fact that it looks so similar to one that's quite toxic that causes severe GI upset. Sometimes this mushroom is referred to by a different name. Sometimes it's called the Smoky-Gilled Hypholoma. So unlike the sulfur tuft, which has greenish or yellowish gills when it's young, this one will have that smoky colored gill. Notice the spore print that you can kind of see underneath this is still going to be those dark, kind of purplish, grayish spores, similar to Hypholoma fasciculare. And from the top side, it looks pretty similar. But underneath, this gill structure is quite different. So I just wanted to show you that this light gray gill color can be a helpful differentiating characteristic. And just up here, we've got another great little mushroom that grows in troops or clusters from conifer wood. This is what's commonly referred to as the Peachfuzz Wood-Umble, Chrysanthellina aurantiaca. And this is such a beautiful, vibrant little mushroom that anytime you catch this early, it's really worth taking a look at. And if you catch this when it's young, you can see one of the best characteristics for clearly identifying this. You have to look really closely, but can you see that little fuzzy, hairy layer on the outer margin of the top of this cap? You can see it's a little striated, but you can also see those fine little hairs. This is a really distinct characteristic that allows you to get this down to species. And, you know, this mushroom will sometimes fade or become a little less vibrant with age. It may be harder to discern or see those little hairs. But when you see it young, it is just such a beautiful sight and a good one to look closely at. And just up here, we've got a mushroom that we discussed last week. This is one of my favorite mushrooms to encounter out here this time of year. This is what's commonly referred to as the sweetbread mushroom, Clitocybe prunulus. You can see it has decurrent gills, enrolled margin. This one we talked about last week. If you missed last week's video, I encourage you to check it out. But this has a very strong farinaceous aroma, and it's actually a great edible mushroom in its own right. Now, unfortunately, this one can look very similar to some toxic mushrooms, specifically in the Clitocybe genus, one of which we spoke about earlier today. But, if you didn't get a chance to check out last week's video, I'd encourage you to check it out because this one can also be a great indicator for king boletes or porcinis. So even if you're not seeking this one out to consume, it can be a very useful mushroom to know. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mushroom Trail. And remember, if you're liking these videos, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified so you don't miss any new great content. All these things go a long way in helping the channel grow and continuing to motivate me to get out on the mushroom trail. There's so much going on out there right now. I can't wait to get the next video out your way. Until next time, happy trails.